Happy New Year, Exiles, and welcome back to another progression and build update video. A lot of things have changed since my last video. For starters, I am now officially in endgame. I was in Crow difficulty in my last video. I am now doing tier 6 of mapping. So yeah, I have grinded quite a bit. This game is mad addictive and I love it. But what has changed a lot is my build. So if you remember, I was running an Invoker Cold Monk with Unbound Avatar Ascendancy. I was running Elemental Invocation with the Bell as my boss and unique enemy clear, as well as manually casting Ice Wall and Shattering Palm for the mob clear. Now, this is quite similar to what I have running right now, except I have removed Elemental Invocation for Flicker Strike as my complete boss and unique clear, as well as mob clear to some extent, and I'm also using Cast on Freeze Ice Wall as my mob clear. So Cast on Freeze Ice Wall with Ice Strike is my go-to clear, and Flicker Strike with the Bell is my boss and unique killer. Now I've also changed up Unbound Avatar for Elemental Expression, which lets me shoot out ice waves whenever I crit. Now I'll talk about this later. So in summary, before I get into the build, it's a full-on crit build relying mostly on a lot of cold damage and freezing. Everything contributes to freeze, which leads to ice wall casting, and then we blow up the ice walls with Flicker Strike and the waves from Elemental Expression for a shitload of damage and just clearing the entire screen. Flicker Strike also destroys bosses as well, especially if you crit with Flicker Strike. Okay, so let's get into the skills. Okay, so firstly we have Elemental Expression, as I touched upon earlier in the video. So this is an active skill you pick up from the Invoker Ascendancy. You pick up this skill by choosing the node and scatter them to the winds. So this lets you shoot out a projectile whenever you land a critical melee hit. Keep that in mind, critical melee, not spell, not projectile, but melee hit. This works for ice, fire and lightning, but since I'm using ice, I fire out an ice wave projectile that has the ability to pierce enemies and deal some cold damage as well. Now I'll talk about this a little bit deeper later in the video. So for support gems, I'm first running Scattershot. This lets me fire 2 additional projectiles, which is honestly really insane because remember, these projectiles can pierce enemies, so adding 2 additional projectiles is just crazy at the cost of some damage, but it's overall worth it. I also have Ricochet. This has a 40% chance to bounce on terrain, so I have a bunch of projectiles that pierce and have a chance to bounce all over the place, which is sick. I also have Concentrated Effect, which does more area damage at the cost of 50% less area of effect, but it's worth it in my opinion. Then I also have Execute, which deals 40 more damage to enemies below 30% health. This one I'm still experimenting with, not very good against bosses, so I might switch this out. There's a skill gem, there's a support gem that lets you fire projectiles in a circle around you. That might be good with projectiles from Elemental Expression, so I might try that out, but we'll see. But for now, these are the supports I'm running for Elemental Expression. Then of course we have Ice Strike, your go-to melee hit. Being a cold melee monk, of course you want to use Ice Strike. This does some really good damage and has some really good freeze build-up, especially that last hit. And remember, we are playing Cast on Freeze Ice Wall. So attack an enemy with Ice Strike, boom, freeze them, cast an Ice Wall, and then blow up that Ice Wall with Ice Strike again, rinse and repeat, delete everything on the screen. That's how that works. Support gems, I'm using Martial Tempo for increased attack speed. Ice Strike just gets better with attack speed. You want as much attack speed as possible. When you quality Ice Strike, it increases in attack speed. You want as much attack speed as possible on your gear. I only have attack speed on my weapon so far. Only 15% increased attack speed, which is not good. I need more attack speed on my gloves and a few nodes on the passive skill tree to make Ice Strike hit as hard as possible. I am also using Close Combat, which lets me deal damage the closer I am to an enemy. Of course, Ice Strike is melee range, so you get all the damage bonus. And I also have Ice Bite, which gives me 25% increased cold damage when I freeze an enemy. Moving on to Cast on Freeze, a meta gem that costs 60 spirit, and we are playing Cast on Freeze Ice Wall. So I have Fortress support, which lets me cast my Ice Wall in a circle, making it easy to entrap enemies. I'm also using Impetus Support Gem, increasing my energy gained by 40%, so we cast more ice walls. Then I'm also using Ingenuity, which reduces the cooldown of my ice walls. I can cast 3 ice walls at a time, each with its individual cooldown. So Ingenuity makes it that each cooldown is way shorter, and I cast a lot more ice walls. Now you guys know me, ice wall is probably my favorite skill in the entire game. It's so good and it's so fun to use. It cuts off enemy line of sight, it explodes for massive damage, it distracts enemies as well. It's basically like a minion, bro. Like, it's so strong, it's so strong. So cast on freeze ice wall for me has always been like a goal. It's very safe and it's very strong. This is going to be your BNB for clearing enemies at close range. Ice strike into ice wall, then blow up the ice wall. So to talk more about cast on freeze, you want to grab all the energy nodes on the passive skill tree, all the nodes that increase energy for your meta skill, in this case cast on freeze. Grab all of those so you always have enough energy to cast ice wall whenever you freeze an enemy. At least you freeze a couple of small mobs, you must always have that ice wall readily available. Now this is very strong as well because it interacts with Flicker Strike. Remember, we want that Flicker Strike with the waves from Elemental Expression, and these waves also interact with the Frost Wall. These waves can blow up Frost Walls as well. So you can blow up Frost Walls from Ice Strike, you can blow up Frost Walls from Flicker Strike, and blow up the Frost Walls from the projectiles that come out from Elemental Invocation. So you see the synergy happening here, right? Cast on freeze ISO is very important for this build if you want those sweet explosions from your Flicker Strike. Now again, get all the nodes on the passive skill tree that increase the energy for your meta gems. I even have a few jewels that give me energy gained as well, just to make sure I'm getting as much energy as possible. So you can always pause and rewind and see all the nodes I picked for my energy nodes. If you want, you can also grab the Ascendancy node that lets you gain 35% increased energy for your meta gems, but it might not be worth it because ISO is pretty cheap, honestly, in terms of energy gain. So you just want to get all the energy nodes on this passive skill tree. We are also using Wave of Frost, which honestly is kind of like a placeholder skill right now. I'll probably replace this when I get more spirit and run more meta gems, but it's a very good skill overall. It's a very defensive skill that does a ton of freeze build up, so it easily freezes an enemy, almost a guaranteed freeze every time you do it. It also covers a lot of space. It's also a very good setup for Glacial Cascade, as I'll talk about later. So I'm using Cold Penetration Support, which penetrates 30% resistant enemy resistance. Of course, this is a very strong support gem. I can probably put this on Ice Strike or my Flicker Strike, but for now it's on Wave of Frost, and I'll explain why later. I'm also using Glaciation, which gives it 50% more increased freeze build-up, so more freeze. And finally, I'm also using Deep Freeze, which lets my freezes last longer. So again, more so of a placeholder, but it's a very good defensive skill either way. Next up is Hand of Chayula for bosses and unique enemies, and this has to be one of the strongest skills in the game for free. It is so busted, bro. Hand of Chayula allows you to socket in curses. So if you have 5 sockets available, you can socket in 5 curses. This doesn't even cost any spirit, which is insane. Like, it's so strong. So I have Temporal Chains socketed in this. This slows down enemy movement and makes my freezes last longer. It basically makes ailments last longer. So in terms of ignite, it makes your ignites last longer, your shocks will last longer. So in my case, since I'm playing freeze, to let my freezes last longer. I'm also playing Hyperthermia, which penetrates enemies' cold resistances by like 30%, which is very strong. You can also run Freezing Mark if you want, if you have more slots, which increases the rate at which you build up freezes. Then finally, I'm also running Sniper's Mark, which is perhaps the most important curse or mark that you should run in Hand of Chayula. So Sniper's Mark places a mark on the enemy, and whenever you land a critical hit on this enemy, you gain a frenzy charge. So remember, we are running Flicker Strike, and Flicker Strike has the ability to consume power charges to dash extra times. So you can dash an extra 2 times per 1 power charge consumed. Now Sniper's Mark gives us frenzy charges and not power charges. So what you do is you have to grab the node on the passive tree called on the passive tree called Resonance. So this lets you gain power charges instead of frenzy charges. This build cannot work without this node. It is a must grab. So that means when you land Sniper's Mark on a boss or unique enemy, you attack the enemy and land a critical hit, you gain a power charge for free. And remember, this build is a crit build, so you're always going to crit when you're done with the build, or at least when you have enough crit, letting you gain power charges very, very easily. Which brings us to our next skill, which is a meta gem called Combat Frenzy. So Combat Frenzy allows you to generate a power charge whenever you freeze an enemy. There's like a 2-second delay between freezes and you getting the power charges or the frenzy charges, but whenever you quality this gem, it lets you gain the frenzy charges even faster. So because again we're using Resonance grabbed from the passive tree, we gain power charges instead of frenzy charges. This is what puts the build together and makes our Flicker Strike very strong, allowing us to gain power charges and dash a bunch of times. I'm using Profusion support gem for this, which gives me 50% chance to gain an extra additional power charge. However, when bossing, you want this socketed in your Hand of Chayula to support Sniper's Mark, because again you want to get power charges from bosses from landing crit hits after applying Sniper's Mark. You can't gain a lot of power charges when bossing using Combat Frenzy, because again you won't freeze the boss all that many times. Which brings us to Flicker Strike. So Flicker Strike is like the heart of this build. It's a 6 skill and it just looks awesome. It's so fun to use, although very risky, but overall fun. So Flicker Strike is a melee attack that lets you teleport all over the place, bro. Like 1 hit per enemy, then just teleport over the place. It has the ability to consume a power charge to dash additional times. So with that, we want to have as many power charges as possible for Flicker Strike. We want as many dashes as possible. We want to maximize this Flicker Strike. With that said, you want to grab every single power charge related node on the passive skill tree. So please feel free to pause, rewind, and check out all the passives I've picked up for the power charges. If you pick all of these up, you can have at least, I think, about 10 or 8 total power charges and have chances to not consume power charges, to actually act as though you've consumed a power charge. So whenever you use a Flicker Strike without power charges, it acts as though you have a power charge. Very, very strong nodes that you have to pick up to maximize the use of Flicker Strike. So Flicker Strike with the bell is going to be your main boss and unique enemy clear, and with power charges, a bunch of power charges, bro, it just goes crazy. Like, it's so ridiculous. It deletes enemies. I was so scared when I let go of my Elemental Invocation plus the bell. Like, that was very strong for bosses, but it allowed me to free 30 spirit and replace it with Flicker Strike, which doesn't even use any spirit. So yeah, it's honestly a win-win. So for support gems, I am first using Rage. So you get 1 Rage per 1 melee attack. 1 Rage is equal to 1% of damage. So 30 attacks gives you 30% Rage, which is maximum. So with Flicker Strike and dashing all over the place, you can easily hit that 30% damage, which is very, very strong. For my second support gem, at the time of this recording, I've actually replaced Inevitable Critical. I was using Inevitable Critical on my Flicker Strike. The thing is, this is very important, guys. Please do note this. Very, very important. When the first hit of Flicker Strike does not crit, all the hits will not crit as well. So you want 100% crit rate on Flicker Strike. If the first hit lands on crit, all the follow-ups will also land on crit. So before this, I was using Inevitable Critical, which increases the crit chance per hit, right? So like the more you attack, the more the crit chance increases. Then when you crit, that crit goes away and it restarts again. So I thought it was perfect for Flicker Strike, but because if you don't crit on the first hit, you won't crit for the rest of the hits, it's actually useless. So I replaced Inevitable Critical with Excise, right? So Excise increases your crit chance by 40%. However, it does add a cooldown to your supported skill. So in my case, when I use Flicker Strike, it adds an 8-second cooldown. But honestly, you won't even feel this cooldown because the cooldown starts immediately you press the skill. So while I'm teleporting all over the place, my cooldown is already reducing, right? By the time it's done, I have like 2 seconds or 3 seconds left on my cooldown, so it's completely worth it. You want 100% crit rate on Flicker Strike for this build to work, guys. I haven't hit that yet, Like I said, I'm only T6 in mapping, so I'm way behind on my build. I have a lot of work to do, but if you have a bunch of crit rate or crit chance, then this would be perfect for a Flicker Strike. 100% crit every single time you get those nice ice waves from Elemental Expression. Cast those ice walls, because remember we are playing a freeze build, right? Cold build. So even Flicker Strike, despite not dealing cold damage, you still have a chance to freeze an enemy because our build overall has freeze build up and does cold damage as well. So very strong and very important to note on Flicker Strike. I'm also using Perpetual Charge. So Perpetual Charge gives me a chance to not consume a power charge, which is again insane. Keeps our Flicker Strike going. So Flicker Strike all over the place. You have a chance to freeze an enemy. Boom, you cast a wall. Flicker Strike again has an interaction with Ice Wall, so you have a chance to blow up the Ice Wall. Also Flicker Strike, and again it's a melee hit. You have 100% crit rate, so you are shooting out projectiles from Elemental Invocation, so from Elemental Expression as well. Did more cold damage, contributing to more freeze, casting more Ice Walls and more explosions. It just keeps going, guys. It is so strong, I'm not even kidding. Moving on to Tempest Bell, nothing has changed in terms of support gems. I still have Overabundance, which lets me build combo for another bell, whilst I still have a bell placed down, very strong. I still have Leverage support, which gives me 50% increased hit chance against immobilized enemies. Since I'm always freezing, this is perfect for this build. So frozen enemy, place a bell, Flicker Strike, go to town. I also have Super Critical, which gives me 100% increased critical damage, which is just stupid, bro. Remember, this is a crit build. We are building crit rate and crit damage, so this when maxed is going to be insane. You lose 20% crit chance, however, but we have that leverage to make up for that. So very strong. The bell becomes a nuke, especially with Flicker Strike. We are still running Herald of Ice, which again is a must use for this build. It gives us those nice explosions when we shatter an enemy or break an enemy after freezing them. I threw on Maim support because I didn't have anything else to put, to be honest with you. Don't even know if this works, but you know, it's supposed to like maim enemies. I also have Bite in Frost, which consumes a freeze to deal more damage. It does not contribute to freeze build up, of course, but because we're freezing enemies and breaking them, so this will deal more damage. It works similarly for Elemental Focus, my other support gem. So it deals 75% more elemental damage, but it will not be able to inflict freeze on enemies, which is okay because again we are breaking the enemies for Herald of Ice. So you're not freezing enemies, we're breaking enemies. So that's what I have on Herald of Ice. I might change a few things up in the future, we will see. I'm also running another spirit gem called Wind Dancer that costs 30 spirit. This is an amazing defensive skill. If you're a monk or just a melee character in general, this might be a very good option for you. So this triggers a wind blast whenever you hit, dealing like some good physical damage. So I added blind and pin support. So blind makes the enemy miss against you, reduces their accuracy rating. Then pin, that spins the enemy, basically pinning them to the ground and stopping their movement. This is very strong. Like it gives you so much freedom to just back away and retreat. And since we are playing a freeze monk and everything on our monk has freeze build up, I also have the chance to cast freeze from this. Like, it's so good. I even have a chance to freeze enemies. I have a chance to cast ISO as well when enemies hit me with this. Like, it's so good. This is why I want to run a bunch of defensive auras for spirit on my monk. I plan on replacing Wave of Frost, like I said, to add stuff like Grim Feast and Ghost Dancer as well. But Wave Dancer is one of the best defensive skills in general, especially for the monk. Glacial Cascade is like our long range option. It's good to have some long range skills in this game because some enemies can be very deadly, bro. Like getting close to some enemies, especially uniques, can be very difficult. So Glacial Cascade is like our keep away from me move, right? Very strong. So I have mobility support, which gives us more movement speed while using the skill, so just move a bit faster. I have cold infusion, giving me 25% more cold damage while using the skill, and I also have heft, which gives me 35% physical damage. Remember, Glacial Cascade converts physical damage to cold damage, so I think it's about 80% physical damage to cold damage. So adding physical damage to Glacial Cascade is a very good idea. Glacial Cascade is also good at breaking frozen enemies. Like the tip of the spike does massive damage. So you can freeze enemies with Wave of Frost and then break them down with Glacial Cascade. And because Glacial Cascade is also a melee, is considered a melee hit like I said earlier, you can crit with Glacial Cascade and get the same ice waves from Elemental Invocation. So you can now throw out Glacial Cascade and have a bunch of ice waves as well. And lastly is Shattering Palm. So Shattering Palm places a bomb on an enemy like chunks of ice, and you can attack these enemies and blow up the chunks of ice to do some pretty good damage. Now, Shattering Palm causes a huge explosion, which is very good with Herald of Ice. That means you can stack up double explosions. If you have Ice Walls out, you can stack up 3 explosions, which is honestly very strong, but I do feel it's a bit overkill for this build. And for that, Shattering Palm might be the other skill I might replace for Grimfest. So Wave of Frost and Shattering Palm might be the 2 skills I replace for Grimfest and Ghost Dance Spirit Gems when I get more spirit on my monk, when I grab my last 2 ascendancy points. But if you do want to use Shattering Palm, it's still very strong. You can dash in, place a bomb on the enemy, and then attack with Ice Strike, boom, cast an Ice Wall, and then just have a massive explosion on the screen. Very strong, clear. I have Magnified Effect Support Gem for more area, for more AoE, so placing bombs on a lot more enemies, and I also have Cold Exposure to add cold exposure against enemies, making it more susceptible to cold damage and freeze. Okay, so now there are a few things that I feel as though they're kind of a must to invest in to make this build work overall as a whole. The first one is by grabbing the I Am the Blizzard Ascendancy nodes on the Invoker Ascendancy. So I Am the Blizzard gives you 10% extra damage as added cold damage, which means every skill that you have will deal cold damage. This is important for Flicker Strike because whilst we're Flicker Striking all over the place, we want to be able to still freeze and cast Ice Walls and then explode those Ice Walls with the projectiles from Elemental Expression. So it's important to grab this node to have cold damage for your Flicker Strike. But if you don't want to, you can still add the support gem. I've forgotten the name of the support gem, but it adds cold damage to your attacks. I think I have it under Glacial Cascade. That can add cold damage to your Flicker Strike and still be able to freeze enemies and cast ice. Well, that's still good. I Am the Blizzard also creates chilled ground whenever you freeze an enemy. Again, this is important because it adds to freeze build up, giving you more ice walls to explode. Secondly, you want to grab as many freeze build up nodes from the passive skill tree as possible. So just search for freeze build up on the passive skill tree and grab at least 1 or 2 nodes, the full complete circle of nodes. You can pause and check which nodes I grab because it's very important. You need as much freeze build up as possible for those ice walls and that Flicker Strike, guys. Very important. I might have too much freeze build up, I need to test, but it works very good so far. I get consistent freezes. It doesn't feel like overkill, it just feels right. Thirdly and finally, of course, like I talked about earlier, is the power charges. You want to grab all the power charge nodes for Flicker Strike to maximize Flicker Strike as much as possible. So these 3 are the most essential things that you need to invest in if you want to have this build work out for you. You can also make this build stronger by adding charged staff. Now, I just want a pure ice themed monk, but if you do like mixing and matching elements, you can add charged staff and add cold damage to charged staff. Charged staff is good because again, it gives you projectiles, and projectiles again will add up to the Elemental Expression projectiles, making you shoot out a bunch of projectiles during Flicker Strike. It's very strong, honestly, like very stronger. Your build just gets way more busted, but I want pure ice monk, so I won't run that. But if you can, please guys, do add that charge stuff as well. As for my gear, I won't go through all this. The video is almost 30 minutes long, holy shit. So you can just pause through my gear and check out what I have. I'm still like remember, I'm only tier 6 maps, guys. I just go to end game, so I still have a lot of work to do. But you want crit on your helmet, crit rate and crit damage, as well as your amulet, crit rate and crit damage as well. As a weapon, you want to stack up as much crit as possible for that Elemental Expression and as much freeze build up as possible. This will make your build going. So there you have it, guys. Cold Monk's Flicker Strike still very much in the works, I need to get my last ascendancy points, I need to get a bunch of crit, and then from there I think I will start cooking. So what do you think about this build, guys? Do you think it works? Do you think it's something you would play? let me know in the comment section below. So thank you so much for making it this far. If you have, I know the video is hella long. I wanted to break down every single aspect of my build because man, it feels good. Strongest build I've had so far. Very, very strong. I didn't even talk about the node that lets you ignore some elemental resistances on enemies. The one that's part of the elemental expression skill tree. It's so strong. There's so much. So anyway guys, thank you so much. Please don't forget to like, subscribe to the YouTube jazz, and stay sane, exiles. GG.